There was once a unity, but being nothing but its own wholeness, had no conception of itself. It eventually began to divide. Then some of its parts could be aware of other of its parts. And although it was no longer what it had originally been, it then had some conception of itself. It now wants to regain some form of unity and become God knows what. From one view, not only is there no rhyme or reason to life, but only those devoid of sound reason find it curious. There is a legend that tells of one faraway reality wherein life once got it in for the neural creatures there, and to get its revenge, it inflicted upon them some conditions and circumstances. Oh my God, how could anyone be that cruel? There were once some beings who you could poison, but not in the usual sense that you think of as poisoning them, since they always cooperated in taking the noxious brew. And some humans immediately contacted the program here to complain. How dare you hold someone responsible for what they do when they do not want to be so held? Or at any other time. Whichever comes first. But see, there's the thing. With the ordinary, it never comes first. Or at all. There was once a ship that sailed all the many seas, and through those treacherous would apparently never survived had it not been for the wisdom and direction of the captain. But there is another level of reality in this story, wherein the same ship plows the same seas with the same success, but with no captain. Whereat the first version of the story is required, there does it appear, to comfort all aboard, but primarily to reassure the captain. There was once a building whose upstairs tenants felt superior to those below due to the repetitive nature of their lives. While waiting in his car at a traffic light one day, one man thought, if it weren't for what happens in life, what would I have to think about? Or if it weren't for what happens in my head, what would I have to think about? Gives you something to think about. A certain chap who had been an armchair student of affairs such as this, one day laid down the book in his hands, gazed straight ahead, and thought, and pondered. The reason that the mystical quest is never more popular than it is simply because it doesn't exist, and ordinary men recognize the fact. He stared a moment or so more, then returned to his reading about such things. Men of war left to quote the dictum, divide and conquer, due to its simplistic usefulness. If man's mind had a belligerent force seeking to overcome it, such an enemy could take no better action than to fragment the mind, which, curiously enough, is its present condition. What do you think? Is there something out there actually threatening the integrity of the mind? Are you certain there is? Or ever has been such a state? If there is a natural unity and stability to the mind, then why cannot a man select the word, unity, let's say, and hold it constantly in mind for, let's say, the next 90 minutes, let's say? The mind is a singularly talented instrument of observation, except in one area. One day while shaving his bike, a man mused to himself, Why do men speak of physically living in the fast lane and burning the candle at both ends, but never make such note regarding their mental life? And as he lathered it up to spokes, thought, guess they never see the need to. There was once an ancient oak tree who, after decades of witnessing the floral activities around it, said to it, if it weren't so funny, it'd really. One father told his son as the youngster headed off to explore new planets, never still in a world in whose dictionary are any entries between the words meaningful and pitiful. One sign of the routinely civilized and the ordinarily minded is that they give most credit for man's progress to the presence of his so-called human emotions. And from a casual, effortless view, this seems justified and appropriate, but will not stand under more careful scrutiny. There was once some birds who had miraculous head feathers, which gave them powers unique in the aviary world. But for some reason, perhaps because of their location above their own field of vision, the birds never recognized the feathers as the source of their singularity. There was once a building whose upstairs tenants dismissed those below because of the repetitive lives they lived. Definitions: natural, effortless, mystical. I don't want to go into it. If you accept the sensation inherent and natural to thinking man, that everything one fears and everything one desires all exist outside of man, you will remain the ever unsatisfied captive thereof, and will, moreover, miss any chance of seeing how and where you've been inseparably woven into the total fabric of life. There was once a knight who could never slay his dragon, nor win his maiden, due to his inability to correctly judge distance and depth. One man gave his life a nickname. It's always something. Which he thought rather apt and charming, though his mind never seemed to get it. A certain man who'd been on the quest with success sufficient that he understood more now than he did when he began to have serious doubts regarding the use of the term enlightenment to describe the aim of such effort, in that the dark, even when illuminated, remains the dark. There was once a little boy who could only count to one, then as he grew, could count to two, and after becoming educated and sophisticated, could count even higher. In fact, there seemed to be no limit to it. He had a friend who traveled the same course, but who refused to stop where everyone else did, at the point of no limit. It is impossible to explain to the ass of the last horse on the carousel the structure of circular carnival rides. But some, when they hear the music played, know that John Philip Sousa would be turning around in his grave were it not for the fact that in realities of even-numbered dimensions, all burials seem to be laid out in one-way streets. To those on the quest, brain dead is not death. Its unbridled activity is. The beautiful and just convolution. Those who picture a supernatural force extrinsic to man and who anthropomorphize it as a god, and in so doing consider themselves being religious, actually commit blasphemy in the sense of misnaming that which they seek to describe. Anything the mind can think of can be thought of as metaphorical. And beyond that, anything the mind can think of as metaphorical can be thought of as literal. Two types of men will never understand this: the literal-minded and the metaphorically so. A certain man who had been on the quest with success sufficient that he understood more now than he did when he began began to have serious doubts regarding the use of the term awakening to describe the aim of such efforts, in that beds, even when shook from sleep, remain beds. Before he could get into that special class, the man had to answer the following question: which do you hate most, to be wrong or to be correct? And he thought on it for a while, then asked, which one is it that makes me fall down and burn myself? One father solar system shouted out to his son, who was behind a closed door in an adjoining galaxy, "You keep playing with your mind like you do your dick and you're going to go worse than blind." But being a true son of his neural father, he knew it was just a josh. No joke time. Only those born lame can go lame. There was once a man who discovered some special food that no one else knew about. But when he attempted to share it, no one was able to see what he was talking about. That is, until he began prefacing all his remarks related thereto with attacks on the audience. And some creatures in the crowd said to themselves, if we weren't so pathetic, we'd really be pathetic. The phrase, "it takes one to know one," arose originally in the mind of one more conscious man, and was not intended to be heard there beyond, save for others of a like condition. Displays of sincerity display a lack of sincerity. Not a willful absence of such, but rather an inability to experience it under the conditions. One day, one man stood and declared, "I demand to know what's going on here," and laughed, barked back, "Who said that?" And the fellow decided for the moment to drop the matter and not reply. Look at it this way. Unless you're irreversibly addicted to cold sores and paper cuts, life don't raise no fools. It can't. So be thankful. And shut up about it. Now for some linoleum tips. There was once a miraculous, mysterious cornfield in which grew only corn. Oh my God, you can't be serious. But indeed I am. And 'twas only the stalks therein who couldn't believe it. Everyone's born with a squirrel. Most people don't know what to do with it, so they just learn to mostly ignore it and live with it. A certain man who had been on the quest with success sufficient that he understood more now than he did when he began to have serious doubts regarding the use of the term rebirth to describe the aim of such efforts, in that, once alive, everything already is all that it's naturally intended to be. The perceptive few go past the point of seeing, through the mind's illusionary dichotomy of such specific notions as good and evil, true and false, with the appearance of one being dependent on the appearance of the other, and discover the overall misrepresentations of everything the mind describes. You further miss out if you blame definitional errors on the dictionary while still attributing its authorship to the incorrect source. One day a tree said to a woodpecker, "Isn't it peculiar how humans will accept any blame that's offered them?" There has never been in this universe any creatures who established a religion based on the body. And the woodpecker agreed, yes, it is all rather peculiar. There was once a building whose upstairs tenants laughed at those below for their repetitious lies. Insert commercial here. It's the nature of those living below to be satisfied, but completely otherwise for those upstairs, which is why men's fables of animals envying mortals are so squalid and embarrassing. Same as with reports of spleens doing so, cortexes. One fellow who'd for many years been a Bermuda Shorts follower of activities such as this, one day looked out the window of his library and pondered, why do so many men seem so impressed over the difficulty in pursuing the mystical quest? After all, how can you be surprised about the unnecessary being hard to accomplish? He continued looking out for a moment or so, turned his gaze back inward like a good little fellow. One man decided to list the major categories he thought about and came up with the following. He thought about things that he had heard said, things that he had said, things that he had seen happen, things that he had done, things that he had imagined he would say and do at some future time. And that was all he could find that he ever thought about. And after thinking about this, thought, this surely can't be all that's possible. It's almost impossible for ordinary people to believe that they're receiving any personally useful information unless it comes in the form of accusation, condemnation, or sermonizing. Keeps the field pretty well cleared of anything related to the secret. When one man first heard Tourette's syndrome described, he thought, so, that's what my mind's had all these years. One man was funnier on an empty stomach than on a full one. Or was that funnier on a fragmented one? The quest redefined as optometry for the mind. There was once a man who was at war and unknowingly swallowed a spy. There was once a man who was at war, but it was his imagination. There was once a man who swallowed a spy, but it was himself. There was once a man who imagined he was at war, and in the process, unknowingly, swallowed himself. War during lifetime. A hangnail history of all mysticism. First you kick the body around, then you kick the emotions around. Then you try and kick the mind around until, if you're successful at it, it comes to realize that kicking your body around accomplishes nothing, and doing so your emotions even less. Kind of leaves the old mind in the position it unwittingly asked for. What? Bemoaning the fact that little in life ever lives up to its own billing, one man changed his middle name to middle name. A certain man who had been on the quest with success sufficient that he understood more now than he did when he began to have serious doubts regarding the use of the term transformation to describe the aim of such effort in that. No matter what one thing is apparently changed into, it's still that thing. Insert second commercial break here. A certain man who had been on the quest long enough to know what was going on began to understand that there is no word to describe what's going on. And now for some more facts. Those who won't be satisfied can't be satisfied. Almost no one can be satisfied. Check in your home reference guide under BRL, being routinely alive. One grand thing, said the woods grand wizard, about being a fox, an eagle, or a hare is that, since you don't know that you are one, you can't be dissatisfied in being one. Reporter's obligatory notation. The sensation of exactly what constitutes dissatisfaction can vary widely from one creature to another. A cosmic tale is told regarding beings on another world in this universe, much advanced beyond this one, who have determined the value of facts to be roughly half that of aluminum cans. A Papa Neuron told his son, "Don't laugh at your inferiors." And the lad thought, what a joke. And now from a competing thesaurus, this definition of a mystic: one who can make everyday affairs sound mystical. And of course the opposite as well. Now a skiing update. No one ever knows a mystic unless they're accidentally in a very limited area for a very limited length of time, or else they are one. Everyone starts out simple and naive. Then they become hip and sophisticated. And would-be mystics become mystically hip and sophisticated. And if they go on to become actual mystics, they become consciously simple and naive. As in, by your leave, my Lord. One guy adopted the personal approach of, don't take it personally, till he reached the point of having no personally. When one man heard the line of a song that said, "Let me hear your body talk," he at first thought, how could you not? But upon further reflection added, unless you were listening with the mind. Seeing a sign in a market that advertised 3-pound glazed hams, one man scratched his head and thought, for some reason that sounds strangely familiar. Although unrealized by the ordinary, at the mental level, life is a game. In fact, your choice of 2 games. Either stand up tall or bend over and grab your ankles. A mental game. An impish spirit once presented a man with a challenge, saying it would give him a prize if he'd correctly calculate the total number of different thoughts he had. And after what seemed to be quite extraordinary effort, the man did so. And as his reward, came apart. Men love to concoct myths regarding their origins, so they won't have to face up to where they really came from. A mystic redefined again is like someone who continues to tell jokes long after he realizes that there's nothing particularly funny going on. Although life is the secret, the mind's observations of life are like a preface to the secret. One of the abilities of the mind is that it can plot in its imagination places where no man has ever gone, but in some instances, by doing so, precludes them from ever doing so. Yet another reason that mystics can't afford to listen to anybody's ideas. Least you conceive of man as overly complex and under-evaluate the power of functions simple and obvious. Remember this: there are no such things as human emotions without the mind. Therefore, can they be said to truly exist as a separate process outside the mental one? A man of vision does not require the sight of a fly, and routine explanations of combustion can produce smoke sufficient to cover all traces of fire. When you consider the marvelous evolutionary travels of man under the apparent direction of the intellect, try to simultaneously fit this to the fact that the mind can map, but it cannot walk. Try to picture what it would be like. Try to picture how it could be like if you lived more or less the same life you do now, but without the constant presence of thought. At first you may think this is foolish, that you could not live as you do without the constant activities of your mind. But this is patently self-evident only if not objectively examined. It is useless to try and describe directly in words, and extremely tricky and unnatural to attempt in person. But it is possible to try to imagine it, and then get an actual glimpse of a reality in which a so-called thinking creature is living by other means. Someone or something kept knocking on one man's door. And from our secret Transcendentalist Handbook, this heartwarming excerpt. The only thing that stands between a rational man and a higher state of consciousness is everything. Well, hey, at least they narrowed it down for you. Something kept banging on one man's door. And well, before I do tonight's in our series, our continuing series, I have what I fear is some bad news. I have decided not to run for re-election to this position. As many of you know, I have almost no private life anymore, with the press always nosing around. That, in conjunction with the shamefully small salary this position pays, in conjunction with the copious out-of-pocket expenses I must personally bear session to session, year to year. Just all in all, it has taken a tremendous toll on my family, all my personal relationships. That, of course, in addition to, is that well publicized, several tragedies I had of death so close to my immediate family, friends, support group here. And also, as most of you know from the 4 massive heart attacks and 3 liver failures that I experienced last Labor Day. Then topped off last Thursday at rehearsal by my sudden illness due to an absolute total attack of exhaustion and dehydration. Tonight's in our series of me presenting, contrary to what people think, evidence, if you can hear it, that life continually is giving, and I say hints as an understatement, but just hints right out in the open, right in your face. And my warning again, if you hear it as being some simple, sarcastic, cynical notation, then you miss it, because that is what you would normally take it to be. What I'm about to pull out, tonight's example is all of them, you have already been confronted with more than once, been exposed to it. And if you gave it any heed, you probably did take it either as, if you're taking it the way I'm describing, that your reaction would very likely range somewhere between cynicism and sarcasm. Or, if you resisted that at all, you might have tried to look for deeper motivations, subconscious motivations. And again, if you do such as that, you miss it. That's why life can afford to do this right out in the open. Of course, life can afford to do whatever the hell it wants to, but figuratively speaking, it can put it right out in the open, because it knows that people will look right out in the open, as always, and go, let's see. Tonight's. When serious patrons of the art are interviewed, and those of such world renown as to deserve a serious interview, but when interviewed, they will limit their comments almost entirely. These art lovers, these patrons, these collectors, their comments will be almost entirely limited to how much they paid for each work of art. We were still talking about last time I semi-humorously started off leaving it with a rhetorical question, is all talk metaphorical? But I was getting more specific after I'd done all that, and you got over the predictable gales of laughter which engulfed. Never mind. Shows you're getting better. At least you don't find it funny that all talk might be metaphorical. You think, yeah, so. Yeah, but I could have just meant that symbolically. And you could have gone, yeah, but I had them allegorical ears anyway. So, it's illusions dancing with shadows. But, I had specifically started several nights ago, if you recall, not for the apparent reasons, not for the literal reasons, but on the basis that, still in line with the fact that life does not actually hide the secret so much as men's ears are clouded. If I'm sure you will pardon the mix of metaphors, since most people didn't notice anyway. But either that or your eyes are full of wax. Take your choice. But I was trying to get you to see, not to promote publicly recognized or publicly available written mystical material and etc. But again, it's just the kind of way. Here's a better reason I've been doing this. I wrote it tonight. I knew I'd heard it something neat previously. That attempting, for someone who knows to attempt to tell the secret, you got two choices. You either attempt to do so plainly or metaphorically. But neither one alone is sufficient. So there it is. That wasn't a question, that was a statement. See, there it is. That it is a fact. That's sort of a joke the way I put it, the setup to say, well, you got two choices. There are only two ways to go about attempting to describe it, to talk about it. One is very plainly, just simply and plainly. The other is metaphorically. But neither way alone is sufficient. Part of the little humor there, you should be getting by now, at least theoretically, is whether even the first possibility is truly a possibility. Mm-hmm. But even if it were, even if there is in some way something you can say fairly plainly and directly about it, it is still alone not sufficient. I gave you a prediction without even knowing your sign that if you go far enough, you will someday stumble upon the same thing in your own words, your own way. It's part of the reason that whatever the secret is cannot actually be described. It's not because of some, well, it's not even a simple reason as most people would imagine. Because most people, whenever they run across the idea or even become convinced that it has some validity, they feel like, well, and then it's pretty simple ideas that most people have. One is this conspiracy that there's some group of people that know it and they're holding on to it because it gives them some sort of supernatural power. That's the most commonly believed. But the point is, there is no real simple reason. It's at least it's a complex reason to this point, that there are two simple reasons that it can't be described. All right? Because there are only two ways you can talk about things. There are only two ways in which, about anything, that humans can speak. One is plainly and directly, that is literally, and the other way is metaphorically or symbolically. And this goes on continually, not just in this sort of activity, but men continually, men in politics, people in the arts, in human relationships. People sometimes speak literally. They don't sit around and plan it any more than they plan anything they're going to say. But sometimes they speak very plainly and directly. I love you, I hate you, whatever it is. And then at other times, they just as unthinkingly, but just as effortlessly, they will slip into metaphorical or symbolic speech. There's only two ways to communicate verbally. That's either plainly and literally, or metaphorically, symbolically. When it comes to the secret, you're in the same position. you've got those two choices, except this is what makes the secret, or keeps it truly secret, is in the case of the secret, neither one alone is sufficient. I would suggest that you give even more latitude to what the word sufficient means than you normally do. What it means, all right, I'll go ahead and do it. What it means is you've got two ways you can describe things. So, if you use them both, which people do not normally do at any particular time, whatever they're speaking of, it is just the natural flow of the neural activity in man that's manifesting itself in the tongue that ordinary people, neither right or wrong, there's no way to judge it, but it just seems natural at that time that they speak either directly and plainly about something, and perhaps several seconds later, they'll speak metaphorically about it. But at any particular time, the one seems to be proper. The one seems to, at least to them, to convey what they intended. With a secret, it won't work. Neither one will work alone. But then you think, well, then what? There is where this sorts of thing can strike some outsiders, civilians, as being verbally, literarily, if it was down on paper, too complex, too convoluted, too redundant, but they're not sure how. Because it is due to the fact that neither of those are sufficient by themselves. The unstated part of my news item is that you got to do them both, but you're supposed to already figure that out. But you understand, it's not that one of them that you're holding back. It's like to make any conveyance, any attempted telling of the secret has got to have two legs like any other upright creature, let's put it that way. And that literal speech, an attempted plain telling of it, would be like a left leg. A metaphorical telling of it would be like a right leg. And so then you think, well, all right, all you got to do is put them together and the damn thing will walk. That's what makes it so interesting. Figuratively speaking. But I was back. What we were talking about was all the many common descriptions, specifically, of spiritual activity. And what I was trying to get you to consider were actually unwitting representations of something else. And down to the point, or above the point, of men simply attempting to torture their body, attempting to squelch human emotions in some way, or to girdle them up, to redirect them. But somewhere beyond all of that is what seems to be the most fervent, what seems to be the most passionate descriptions of ordinary men's, even though they call themselves extraordinary, but spiritual people of the past who have attempted to lay down some history, that have even attempted to develop some method, some approach, some system based upon their personal experience, pardon me. That was for personal experience of everyone's. Wasn't named in any particular Christian cult, monastery, religious order. Just all of them seem to be, I kept talking around the general area, but notice all spiritual literature will end up zeroing in when there's somebody attempting to recount on the basis of spiritual activity, of a life devoted to spiritual activity. It always gets down focused to living a secluded life engaged in prayer. Now they can call it all sorts of things, but it always ends up a matter of degree as to how serious they apparently were in their pursuit of the great secret, in the pursuit of some extraordinary experience, whatever they call it, their union with God, the return to an original state. It will always come down to, now we're talking about people who left some sort of record and who encouraged others, but who left a record as on the basis that they at one time had some close experience to God, that they experienced something resembling the secret. And here is how I did it. Here is how I encourage you, my brothers and sisters in Christ, or in whatever religion, is to do this. And whatever the fringe trappings are, it always gets down to living the life of the contemplative, cut off more or less from the outside world, and in those conditions of at least semi-seclusion, of limited exposure to the external world, is then, within that context, is to devote yourself almost entirely, as much as possible, to prayer. Now, if you get past all that you've already been conditioned, now, I won't go in. There's no such thing as condition. It's just genetic conditions. But at any rate, if you get past whatever past impressions you had, to make it fast, of what prayer is and what living a secluded life in a monastery, reminding you again that if you were past that point and you read such as that, you could at first conclude, wait a minute, these people knew more than they were talking about. They knew that they weren't doing in prayer and etc., which I've already pointed out is not true, and there are 2 or 3 interesting levels of what should be new information to you. Not to show off, but new information to jog your own nervous system, to realize that it does not matter whether they understood it or not. And then for you to realize, how come I always thought it mattered? How come even now, if I glance off for a second and pick my nose or get distracted, I'll think it does matter. 2 seconds after realizing it doesn't matter, I'll be looking off and thinking, I wonder what St. John of the Cross's real name was. Didn't I read somewhere that somebody speculated he might have been, instead of a Christian, he could have been actually a Sufi, using another. And 2 seconds before, you were realizing it doesn't matter. Historical figures are for children. The belief in historical figures, or if you get good, the belief that other people exist. That's really for children. Well, it doesn't matter ordinary other people. It doesn't matter whether they exist or not, once you begin to understand something. But the belief that there are extraordinary other people existed, you are back severely in the arms of Winnie the Pooh or somebody. You're not only taking a nap, you're half asleep and simultaneously beating yourself on the head with some heavy object, trying to render yourself further unconscious. You're trying to find new depths to REM. You're trying to find some new comfortable position somewhere between unconscious, being unconscious, and being dead. But consider what again, I know how easy it is that you, even sitting here, me going through all this, that, well, watch yourself. It's not a contest, me condemning you that you're too weak, but you should find it in yourself that your nervous system, it is the whole magnetic attraction and weight of the mundane world pulls at you. It's almost impossible to shake yourself out of it. I mean, my God, I do walk around almost comatose. And you're right back thinking about, what got me here? What do you mean, what got you here? Can you spell being alive? Well, wait a minute, there's more to it than that. Yeah, there is now, as soon as you said that. I mean, so much more to it as soon as you say that. Let's see, how much is so much more to it? Let's see, how can I spell the ways? Can you spell everything? It is not to try and show that ordinary ideas of spirituality are camouflages for other things, etc. But what I was going to say should be interesting is note that your mind still wants to go, wait a minute, this is some kind of little lecture about that there are other things going on in the world and we should look metaphorically behind it. It sounds that way, but what I'm trying to get you to see is to look metaphorically behind it is to further delude yourself. There's nowhere to look behind it. I've already told you, those that talking about, well, praying to God is the whole point, or what I seek is the face of God, that's as much as they understood. But there is nothing to analyze. They are simply taking a higher state of consciousness, an expanded state of awareness, and they have anthropomorphized it. I mean, it couldn't be simpler. There's nothing to look for. And to say, well, wait a minute, they hid it behind metaphors so that ordinary people wouldn't see it. Gag yourself with a carp. You don't have to hide anything from ordinary people. What's there to hide? That's what I always like about the idea of this kind of activity is It's still called that. There are people that love to do it. And they'll just get the shivers to call it the great secret work. We've got to hide out. The Philistines will get their hands on all these great ideas. Of course, always notice who it is that's worried about the Philistines, outsiders, getting their hands on their great ideas. The greatest ideas that such groups have is, what kind of weird way can we dress that no one else has thought of? What new obscene things can we do with our hair? What ways can we torture our diet to the point that we almost are famished? That's the secret. What handshake can we come up with that's never been tried? At any rate, there is no secret, and it's not a lecture about the possible secret metaphorical dimensions behind public spirituality. It's another reason. So here we go again. But consider it always gets down to living a life secluded, as much as possible, devoted to prayer. What does that? What is it actually reflecting? Without them knowing it. Because that is about as good as you ever find out in the general public any description of what this is about. To seclude oneself. What they are attempting to do, what it represents, is and again, we're giving those people, remember, we're giving those who wrote about such matters as limited, as crude as their understanding was, as stunted. If they talked about God, then that's as far as it went, and it was just one step beyond normal, beyond the ordinary. It can be a sizable step, but they still never they never experienced what it is. But if they say that, what are they speaking of? What does that represent? The idea that you must be secluded. And it's not just in Christianity, it's all over the world, as you know. It's always true, whether they actually get off each person individually isolated. They generally will get together, those of a like mind. But still the point is that we as a group, whether it be 2 or 3 of us, or if it was just me, the person, is to in some way secret ourselves away from the ordinary world. Without any necessary condemnation of the world, just get away from it and get over here and devote ourselves to our extraordinary aim. What does that represent? What is that actually represent? What real individual? Non-supernatural urge is that a representation of? It is to try and find that core of one's consciousness that wants to do this. You're trying to get it isolated from the fragmentation of the rest of your mind. And they simply look at the world. Ordinary people, they always look at the world. I said even those that want to, or those that claim that they support or see the need for a life of seclusion, even when I said without any particular condemnation of the world, that was a bit hasty because, as you know, they normally, to varying degrees, they do find fault with the world. Or else they would not be secluding themselves. But the fault with the world is always that the fault, if they're Christians, of course, they see them as being heathens. You know, if they're Muslims, they see them as being infidels. It's always the outsiders in the walls of a monastery or hiding out in a cave with a big rock across the door represents keeping the non-believers, keeping those of conflicting interest away from me so that I can devote my attention. But what that represents is, if you know what you're doing, I mean, it's not a speculation on my part, it's not searching for some great metaphorical meaning, you find it in you. It's obvious. Once you get to the point that you have any idea of knowing what this is about, you understand, I've got to keep the Philistines away from me. The Philistines are not out there. They're not other people. They're not even representations of other people. Other people are not metaphors for Philistines. The Philistines is the fragmentation of your own thinking. What? The fragmentation of your own... Wait a minute. No. Oh, wait a minute. I know what you mean.
Yeah.
Wait, I read that somewhere.
Yeah.
If the nature of the mind was not fragmentation then, as a news item tonight pointed out, then a man could take, let us say, a word. What word would you like? How about fragmentation? That a man could take such a word and decide, I will hold that in mind, let's say, for the next 90 minutes. And if you find that too spooky, too unusual, then I'd try this. I'll give you another version. That a man would take the word spooky and decide, I will hold that in mind for the next 20 minutes. Do you like that better? Or how about I'll hold the word minute in my mind for the next 90 seconds? What is prayer representing in all of this? Why all over the world? That in some fashion, even those spiritual systems, that's no consequence, but like in a sense how Shinto and Buddhism started, that actually had no idea of an extrinsic deity originally, but anyway, they still is the feeling, if they don't call it prayer, they call it meditation. Meditation on some attribute. But what are they still trying to do? It's the right hand to the left hand of seclusion, because once you do seclude yourself, once you have followed, once these spiritual people say that to lead a life, to devote your life and to reasonably expect any benefit from this life, you must take yourself away from ordinary world. You must live a life in some way of a recluse. But then once you do that, what are you going to do with the time? The other side of it is, there has to be some aim to it. There's got to be some activity. The activity is always prayer. What does prayer represent? The ordinary, they always say it's supplications to the extrinsic supernatural force and etc. And don't look for a metaphor. You can say, well, that is a metaphor for what you're about to say. Yeah, you can say that, but goddamn, you're going around, it's like you're just taking off in East St. Louis, go all the way around the world to slip back up in West St. Louis. And on top of that, Ike Turner doesn't even live there anymore. But at any rate, it's to go all the way around the world. You don't have to look for, well, wait a minute, that's a metaphor for so-and-so. Well, yeah, except it was so-and-so before it was a metaphor. As long as you keep looking and saying, well, I've got to analyze this. For a while, I know it seems to be what you must do, and it can always be interesting if you've got nothing else better on TV or in your own brain. But insofar as you must search out, that you must dig into the mundane minds, M-I-N-E-S, of men's minds, to ferret out these nuggets, these pieces of small metaphorical gold, okay, if you want to. But once you know how to do it, you walk right up to these mines and you go, well, I'll be goddamn, there's gold everywhere. Or if you think that's pushing it, you walk up to the mines, M-I-N-E-S, and you go, well, I'll be damned, there's a bunch of mines. Except they're all surface mines. There's nothing to dig. It's only down below that you've got poets and metaphysicians. They're down below digging them out. You can hear them down there. You can hear them in you, going, wait a minute, what's the meaning of all this? And up on the surface, there is no question of what's the meaning of all this. You look, and there it is. You seclude yourself. I've already pointed out what that is. And then what is prayer? Prayer is just obvious as hell. Once you get past the point, which all of you should be more or less sometimes, that picking on your body is going to do you any good. That trying to kick around emotions is going to do you any good. That's the way that's going to accomplish anything regarding this sort of thing. It ends up here, and what does prayer represent? It is the attempt. It is being driven. It represents the desire for a man to focus, to stabilize his fragmented thinking. That awareness is surely a form of blasphemy in the way in which I described it tonight. One way, which is not ill-advised, it is a misnaming of that which you attempt to describe, which is why everybody says God, and they believe they're being religious or Allah, whatever they say, they are unwittingly being blasphemous because they are describing. They're attempting to describe, and sometimes confidently so, they seem, to describe that, and they're misnaming it. I mean, what could be more blasphemous? I'm just taking their ordinary view. Everybody thinks you've got to be very touchy. With gods, we all know how they are according to their view. They're easily offended. They can be embarrassed. You can make them mad. You can insult them. So you got to watch it. And that, to them, that's blasphemy. You got to be very careful. Watch what you eat. Watch the way you dress when you come to holy places. Watch the way you act, because gods are touchy. That's not blasphemy. The blasphemy is calling them God to start with. The blasphemy is calling something by a name that you've got no conception of. You got no idea what you're saying. Which last time, as you recall, one guy, I'd set you up for several days about people here and there complaining about the sound of the human voice and this and that. One guy said that he finally decided it wasn't so much the sound of the human voice per se, it's of hearing voices talking about things that they don't have any understanding of, which, I didn't point it out, but which constitutes, could we agree on just probably a large part of what people say, which is also why I continue to throw in, I did tonight about displays of sincerity. The dramatics of people. When you have to be sincere, when you have to display your sincerity, well, hey, now look, I'm serious. Now, we're running out of time because I can't keep... Now listen, this is something that... You missed it? At any rate, well, back to my normal insincere self. Where there is some promise, where there is some hope, where there is sincerity, there is no hope. Again, I point out to you a certain curious coincidence. Sincerity and stupidity start with the... Prayer is attempting to bring some central focus from the fragmentation that passes for the human intellect, that passes for human consciousness. What is prayer trying to do? And I keep trying to give them a little credit. But, and I point that on the basis as opposed to anyone running around with still a cynical attitude that, well, the religion has no idea what they're doing. Well, certainly not. Well, what the hell? Neither does economics, meteorology. What the hell you want from religion? But the point was, as opposed to, let's say, meteorology or air conditioning repair, at least religion gave it a better shot. They at least turned their attention to, even though they misnamed it, of trying to do something with the man's consciousness. But the idea of prayer is the whole thing that you hear it, the more passionate they were, Christian, Jewish, Islamic, whoever it is, would-be mystics, those living a spiritual life, is that they will plead. You can hear just blood almost pouring out of their little verbal veins over the period of 500 years looked at afterwards, after the fact, of them saying that all they did, that they would, and they would still throw in the things about trying to starve themselves or beat themselves or deprive themselves, or whatever it was, anything they thought would help focus their attention to where they could spend hours, every waking hour of the day, every minute they wanted to sit there in their little cell and do nothing but say, God have mercy on me, or Allah be great, Allah be pleased. That all they wanted to do was keep saying the name of God. And you can just dismiss that and say it's childish, which it is, but again, it's not as, it's better than economics can come up with, or philosophy, or political science. At least they were trying, they didn't know what they were doing, but what are they trying to do to say, all I want to do is think of God. I don't want to think of any other thing. I want to cut out all earthly desires, which I was going to get into. That's not what they're wanting to do. That represents something else. To try and suppress human desires. And then it comes out as being trying to suppress hunger, sexual desires, greed, and all that. Once you see what it's based on yourself, it is not an attempt to actually stop human desire. What it represents is the desire to recognize that all mental preference is illusionary. Because that's what desire is. Because they're talking here, we're not talking physical. That's how they keep distracted. I want to cut out physical desire. That's not it. Physical desire is not going to stop anything. You can screw and then later still engage in trying to be more awake. You can eat and then later undo your belt and go back to trying to reach a higher state of illumination. Or need I point out to you, you've got to do some of them too. Try tomorrow to struggle for greater regeneration or enlightenment. You've got to eat. You've got to sleep. What they're attempting to do is focus on one thing, and all of this has to do with the mind. But that's about as high as you can find it out in the public view. Is at the spiritual level, that it's religious, that in some way this is all a search, or as they would hear me call it the mystical search. I go, yeah, it's a search of man for reunion to God. Well, yeah, but come on, grow up. Well, I'm 40 years old. No, damn, you're 10,040 years old. Grow up. Open your eyes a little bit. I can answer for them to me. I know. At least I don't take it personally.